We all need resources to remind us to run to God when processing everything that's going on in our lives. But how awesome would it be to have that resource when processing current events and the news every day? Yeah, that's what the Pour Over offers you and every one of us. They've got an awesome newsletter that you got to check out, but you got to check out their podcast as well that drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's 5 to 7 minutes, and it is just the top news of the day paired with brief reminders to help you stay focused on God. And I'll tell you, it is the perfect partnership podcast with the Verse podcast. Get the news of the day, get reminders to stay focused on God, and then listen to the Verse podcast to help you grow closer to God by reading the Bible and reflecting and meditating on His Word. Sign up for free for the Pour Over. The link is in the show notes.
A Brighter Media Group original.
Welcome to the Verse Podcast, a daily pursuit to become more perceptive to what the Bible says. My name is John, and today we are reading from the book of Philippians, chapter 4, verses 4 and 5. You know those people who just walk into a room and their joy and their energy just lights it up? And you can think of other people where they're just joyless and they've got this negative energy that just sucks the life out of the room, and that can rub off on people. You know, it's even a reminder for me to take stock on how many joyful people are around me or not, because that can definitely influence you. And today's verses tell us that this real joy can exist outside of relationships and outside of this idea of a standard of living or circumstances. So before we read, and we do this every podcast, I encourage you to do it in your own studies too, but to look at context, not just with what's around the other verses that you're reading, but scripturally. How does this contextualize, maybe even from the Old Testament to New Testament? What is the context culturally of what was going on at the time? Why was it written to this audience? And historically, what was going on at the time? So we're going to do that now. The Apostle Paul wrote this letter to the church in Philippi, Macedonia. This was on the coast of Greece, on the Aegean Sea. This was actually the first church ever in Europe. And the first convert in the first church in Europe was a woman named Lydia. Paul indicated that he was in prison at the time of writing this letter, and it's widely accepted that he wrote this from a Roman prison in AD 62. The church and Paul are facing incredible opposition during this time. Persecution from government, drummed up by Jews who didn't believe in Jesus. Also false teachers in their congregation. There was a lot going on, spiritual abuse, conflicts with each other, and Paul was in prison for about 2 years while this was going on. A Roman prison is no cakewalk, by the way. Traditionally, Roman imprisonment was preceded by being stripped naked and then flogged. The bleeding wounds went untreated. Prisoners sat in painful leg or wrist chains, mutilated. Blood-stained clothing was not replaced, even in the cold of winter, and the cells were dark, inner cells of a prison, underground, unbearable cold, lack of water, cramped quarters, sickening stench from the few toilets that exist. I can imagine that sleeping was difficult and that the waking hours were miserable. Prison food, if available, was poor. Most prisoners had to provide their own food from outside sources. And because of the miserable conditions, many prisoners begged for a speedy death, and others simply committed suicide. Yet, my friends, Philippians, that Paul writes from this Roman prison, is a book and a letter of joy. Incredible. So with that context, let's read just 2 verses from Philippians today, but I encourage you to read all of it. Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 and 5. Always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. Let everyone see that you are considerate in all you do. Remember, the Lord is coming soon. That's the New Living Translation. I'll read this again from the ESV. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. So from a human perspective, this verse makes no sense in its context. The path to joy, especially in these conditions, is to choose to rejoice, meaning it has nothing to do with my circumstances, nothing to do with my relationships or my life. When I'm up, I'm up. When I'm down, I'm down. Joy means choosing to rejoice in the midst of that, the good and especially bad. This joy we're encouraged to have doesn't deny the existence of pain or grief, by the way. Even Jesus had grief. Only when we are consistently despairing or hopeless has sadness become tainted by sin. Biblical joy has to do with the stability and the celebration on the inside, regardless of the circumstances on the outside. And when you do that, when you choose that, it's attractive. It can't be denied. Verse 5 has some different translations, by the way, and the words considerate, graciousness, reasonableness. But the conclusion I've come to is that it embodies not spreading unhappiness, not being vindictive or hateful when things aren't going our way, but to embrace a good attitude because God is close, closer than we think. And so the encouragement today is to rejoice no matter what you're going through, and don't complain. God is near. Thank you so much for listening to the Verse podcast today. Like I said, I hope it continues to encourage you in your faith, that you continue to become more aware and more perceptive to what the Bible says. If you wouldn't mind following the podcast wherever you listen, that would be amazing. I'd be so appreciative of that. Everything you need to know is in the show notes. All the resources I use to build these podcasts and resources that I've put together for you to do your own study, those are there. Check out the show notes, and hopefully today is a beautiful day for you, and that you can make hope louder for yourself and those around you. We'll talk tomorrow.